Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time. Today, we are going to look at a system that it's largely invisible to those who don't have to navigate it, yet it dictates the minute-by-minute behavior, the self-image, and even the survival strategies of millions of people.
Yeah, it really does.
We're talking about the collision, and it really is a violent collision between biology and sociology. Specifically, we're asking a systemic question that feels incredibly urgent in our current moment. How do men negotiate the concept of being a man when faced with the constraints of a chronic illness, specifically type 1 diabetes, in a culture that views health not just as a state of being, but as a personal responsibility?
And a moral virtue. That part's key.
Exactly, a moral virtue.
It is a massive question. And honestly, it's one that goes so far beyond the medical reality of, blood sugar or insulin ratios. It touches on how we construct our identities in this era of self-tracking, performance culture, and social media narratives. I mean, we are living in a time where being healthy is almost a competitive sport.
It really is.
And where illness is often framed subtly or, sometimes overtly as a failure of will.
Exactly. It's that feeling that if you aren't optimizing, you're failing. And before we go any further into the weeds here, I want to be crystal clear about the scope of this deep dive for everyone listening.
Good idea.
This is not a medical guide. We're not giving health advice. We are not telling you how to manage diabetes or any other condition.
No.
We are doing a deep dive into sociology and cultural systems. We're looking at the scripts we've all been handed by society and what happens when our bodies refuse to follow those scripts.
Precisely. We are analyzing the social mechanics of gender and health. We're looking at the software of society that runs on the hardware of our bodies. A perfect topic for this show.
To do that, we are diving into a fascinating, really dense and illuminating piece of research titled Wounded Masculinities, Men, Health, and Chronic Illness by Valerio Quaglia. Quaglia is a researcher in the Department of Political Sciences, Communication, and International Relations at the University of Macerata in Italy. And this book, it's the result of extensive qualitative research. Deep personal interviews with men living with type 1 diabetes and a really innovative analysis of digital narratives on TikTok.
And what makes Quaglia's work so essential and why I think it's perfect for Crisis in Perception is that he is trying to dismantle a very old, very lazy idea in sociology and public health.
Which idea is that?
It's often called the deficit model of men's health. For decades, the academic and medical consensus was, well, pretty simple, masculinity is bad for you.
Right. I've heard this a million times.
Of course. The theory went that men die younger and get sicker because they're stubborn, reckless, risk-taking, and they refuse to go to the doctor. The assumption was that being a real man was inherently a health risk. The trope, the guy who refuses to ask for directions is the same guy who refuses to ask for help when he has chest pain.
Which, to be fair, has some statistical backing, doesn't it? Men do often engage in riskier behaviors. We see that in the data regarding seatbelt use, alcohol consumption, occupational hazards. It's not seemingly made up out of thin air.
They do, absolutely. The statistics are there. But Quaglia argues that this view is way too simplistic. It treats men as these passive victims of their own gender or as cultural dokes who just blindly follow a self-destructive script off a cliff.
Okay.
Quaglia's mission is to show that men are actually incredibly creative and adaptive. When a chronic illness like diabetes hits, they don't just abandon masculinity, they reconfigure it, they negotiate. They find ways to keep being men even when their bodies are seemingly betraying them.
So it's not about rejecting masculinity, it's about hacking it, finding a workaround.
Exactly. It is a negotiation. It's an active process, and they have to do this negotiation in a very specific cultural context. Quaglia talks about the era of healthism.
Okay, let's drill down on that term, healthism, because I feel like we see this everywhere, but we don't always name it. It sounds like a religion.
In many ways, it is a secular religion. Healthism is the water we are all swimming in right now. It is the cultural belief that health is the primary moral virtue.
Right.
If you are healthy, you are good, disciplined, and responsible. If you're sick, or if your health fails, the implication is that you didn't try hard enough. You didn't eat right, you didn't exercise enough, you didn't track your data.
It's the neoliberal burden, right?
Yeah.
The state retreats, the healthcare system is strained, and the burden of care falls entirely on the individual. You are the CEO of your own body.
That is the perfect analogy. You are the CEO, and if the stock price your health drops, it's because you managed the company poorly. It ignores genetics, it ignores environment, it ignores luck. It focuses entirely on individual management. And when you combine that pressure with the digital narrative, platforms like TikTok turning private illness into public performance, you get a very high-stakes environment for these men. They aren't just managing a disease, they are managing their reputation as competent men.
It sounds exhausting. I mean, you're fighting a biological war inside your pancreas and a PR war on the outside.
That is exactly it. And the stakes of that PR war are what Quaglia is investigating.
So let's unpack the core theory here before we get into the specific ways these men behave. The expert terminology Quaglia uses is hegemonic masculinity. This is Erwin Connell's concept, which is foundational in gender studies. Break that down for us. What does hegemonic actually mean in this context?
Okay, so hegemonic masculinity isn't necessarily what the average man is. Most men don't actually achieve it. It's the cultural ideal.
The gold standard.
The gold standard. It's the John Wayne or the CEO or the high-performance athlete. In Western society, the hegemonic male is autonomous, strong, invulnerable, rational, and in control.
He's a producer, not a dependent.
Precisely. He provides.
Yeah.
He does not need to be provided for.
And here's the conflict. Type 1 diabetes is, by definition, a state of dependence. You are dependent on insulin to survive. Without it, you die. You are dependent on technology to monitor your blood. Your body is uncertain. It might crash into hypoglycemia at any moment.
You're tethered.
You're tethered to a medical regime.
That is the double bind that Quaglia describes. It's a paradox. On one hand, the disease requires behaviors that are culturally coded as feminine. You have to care for your body, monitor it constantly, pay attention to what you eat, perhaps admit weakness or ask for help when your sugar drops. These are traditionally associated with the care role, which is, feminine.
Right.
But the culture demands you project masculine competence. So how do you solve that equation? How do you do feminine things while staying a man?
You reframe the feminine behaviors as masculine skills. You rebrand them.
Bingo. You don't care for your body, you master it. You don't worry about your health, you optimize your performance. This brings us to the concept of masculine capital.
Masculine capital.
Yeah. Think of masculinity like a bank account. If the illness makes a withdrawal, say you have a hypoglycemic episode in public and look weak, you have lost capital. You are in the red.
Right.
You need to generate status elsewhere to balance the books.
So you might become hyper fit or hyper-rational. You overcompensate to get back in the black.
Exactly. You generate capital through other means to prove you are still a man. And Quaglia, he identifies 3 specific ideal types or archetypes of how men do this. And these aren't just abstract categories. They are behavioral strategies. They're survival mechanisms.
Okay, let's walk through these 3 archetypes because I think everyone listening will recognize these people, either in themselves or in someone they know. The first archetype Quaglia identifies as the tracker or the lay expert.
Yes. The tracker is the man who leans all the way into the data. Type 1 diabetes involves a lot of numbers: blood glucose levels, carbohydrate ratios, insulin units, correction factors.
So many numbers.
So many. The tracker treats his body like an engineering problem. He dissociates the biological reality from the emotional reality and turns it into math.
There was a quote from one of the participants that I loved. He compared diabetes management to being an accountant or an equilibrist.
Yes.
He said, I transform carbohydrates into numbers. I add units in proportion. I add or take off based on activity. Sounded exhausting, but also incredibly precise.
It is precise, and that precision is the point. By becoming a lay expert, these men are reclaiming the narrative. They aren't patients following a doctor's orders. They are controllers.
Right.
They are rational technicians. They often feel they know more than their doctors, which reestablishes their autonomy. The mindset is, I'm not sick, I'm just managing a complex system.
It's intellectualizing the vulnerability. If I can chart it, I can control it. It reminds me of how people track the stock market. It gives you a sense of agency over something chaotic.
Right. And for men, rationality is a key component of hegemonic masculinity. Men are supposed to be logical, not emotional. So if you can turn your illness into a logic puzzle, you are performing masculinity.
Okay, but there was a fascinating and somewhat uncomfortable detail in the research regarding this group. Quaglia noted a specific power dynamic during the interviews themselves.
Yes.
Yes, this part really stood out to me. This is a classic example of doing gender in real time. It wasn't just about how they managed diabetes. It was about how they managed the interviewer.
It really is. The researcher, Quaglia, is a man. But in many sociological studies, the interviewers are often women. Or even just within the context of the study, the dynamic of researcher versus subject creates a hierarchy.
Sure, one has the power.
The researcher asks the questions. The subject is vulnerable. In cases where men feel their status is threatened by the topic, talking about their vulnerability or illness, they often try to reclaim power during the conversation.
How so?
Quaglia notes that some participants would sexualize the female researchers in previous studies, or in his case, dismiss the expertise of the medical staff to reassert dominance.
It's a defense mechanism.
It is a strategy to reassert dominance. If I'm sitting here talking about my broken pancreas, I might feel weak. But if I can turn the tables and objectify the person asking the questions, or treat the interview like a flirtatious game, I reestablish myself as a sexual, dominant male.
Wow.
It's a way of saying, I may be diabetic, but I am still a man who looks at women. Or, I may be a patient, but I know more than the nurse. It's an accumulation of masculine capital in the micro-interaction.
That is wild. It shows how deep this programming goes. It's almost subconscious. You're in a vulnerable position, so you grasp for the nearest lever of power, which is gender. So that's the tracker using rationality and dominance to manage the illness. The second archetype is physically very different. This is the athlete, or the Iron Man.
The athlete is probably the most visible archetype in our current culture. These are men who engage in endurance sports, extreme physical training, marathons, triathlons, Ironman competitions.
The narrative here seems to be, my body isn't broken, it's a machine that I have mastered. It's a very powerful statement.
Exactly. And there is a really important twist here. Usually we think of the hegemonic male as someone who ignores the doctor. The guy who refuses to go for a checkup, who ignores the lump, who says, I'm fine.
All right, the stubborn guy.
But the athlete often over-complies with medical advice. They follow the diet perfectly. They take the insulin perfectly.
So they are model patients.
On the surface, yes. But the motivation is different. They aren't doing it just for health in the sense of holistic well-being. They're doing it to facilitate high performance. They view the body as a tool that needs to be sharpened.
Right, they aren't trying to be well. They are trying to be better than you. It's competitive.
Yes. They use sport to neutralize the demasculinizing potential of the illness. If I can run a marathon, how can you say I'm weak? It's a shield. But Quaglia points out the danger here. They often push through pain. They ignore warning signs because enduring pain is a hallmark of traditional masculinity.
So they are technically compliant with the treatment, but the motivation is almost pathological. It's driven by something other than health.
It creates a paradox. They are healthy by accident in some ways. The goal is the image of the Iron Man, the man of steel. If the steel bends, the identity collapses.
So they can't stop.
They have to keep pushing, sometimes to the point where it actually endangers them just to prove the illness hasn't won. They might run on a stress fracture or ignore low blood sugar to finish a race because stopping would be an admission of defeat.
It's compliance as a form of combat. You're fighting the body to prove you're the master of it. That leads us to the third archetype, which feels like a direct reaction to the first two. This is the free spirit, or the rebel.
This group negotiates masculinity by refusing to let the illness dictate their lives. They minimize it. They frame diabetes as just a nuisance, not a defining characteristic.
Yeah?
They refuse to organize their life around the schedule of the insulin pump.
This is the guy who eats the pizza.
Yes. There is a great quote from a participant named Pasquale. He says, "If I want to eat pizza, I eat pizza. You want to die the richest of the cemetery."
The richest of the cemetery?
Yeah.
That is such a profound rejection of the medical worldview. I laughed when I read it, but it's actually deeply philosophical.
It really is. I mean, think about what medicine asks of you. Medicine is future-oriented. It asks you to colonize your present for the sake of your future. It says, don't eat this now so you don't go blind in 20 years. It's about risk management.
Right.
But hegemonic masculinity often prioritizes the here and now, autonomy, pleasure, doing what I want, living in the moment. The free spirit uses a strategy called bracketing.
Bracketing. What's that?
They put the illness in a set of brackets, separate from their core identity. I am not a diabetic. I am a guy who happens to have to take insulin sometimes. They compartmentalize it.
But by eating the pizza, by refusing the strict diet, they are proving their independence. It's a performance.
Correct. It's a performance of freedom. If I follow the doctor's rules perfectly, I am submissive. I am a good patient, which is coded as passive or feminine.
I see.
By breaking the rules, even if it hurts my blood sugar, I retain my status as a free man. I am the captain of my ship, even if I'm steering it into rough waters.
It's tragic in a way because the physical cost is so high. We know that uncontrolled diabetes leads to terrible outcomes, but I totally understand the psychological utility of it. It's about preserving the self.
It is survival.
Yeah.
But it's social survival, not biological survival. For some men, the death of their autonomy feels worse than the physical damage to their body.
So those are the archetypes from the interviews. The tracker, the athlete, the rebel. But then Quaglia shifts gears and moves into the digital space. He analyzes 100 videos on TikTok to see how these dynamics play out in the 2020s.
Yeah.
And this is where things get really visual.
The digital space changes the game because now you have an audience. You aren't just negotiating with yourself or your doctor. You are negotiating with the algorithm and thousands of strangers. Quaglia found that the hybrid masculinity concept really shines here.
Let's talk about the body as a canvas. The visual analysis showed a lot of skin.
A lot of skin. Hypermasculinity is very present. Shirtless videos, gym selfies, flexing. Men are using the visual medium to visually prove they are not the weak diabetic.
That makes sense.
On TikTok, you can't see a pancreas failing, but you can see biceps flexing.
There was one specific example of a before and after that really struck me. It felt like a classic hero's journey condensed into 15 seconds.
Yes, a user showed a photo of himself as a 13-year-old frail, hospitalized, 39 kilograms, a victim of the disease.
Yep.
The music is probably sad or dramatic. Then he cuts to the present day. 83 kilograms of pure muscle working out in the gym. The narrative is, I conquered the weak body. I built a fortress around the vulnerability. It's visual proof that he has won the battle against his own biology.
It's powerful storytelling.
Yeah.
But what I found fascinating were the pivots.
Yeah.
The way these men justified doing things that are traditionally feminine, like skincare. I mean, generally speaking, talking about your moisturizer isn't top-tier alpha content in the so-called manosphere.
No, it is not. And this is a brilliant example of reframing. Traditionally, skincare is coded as feminine. Real men don't moisturize, right? That's the stereotype.
Yeah.
But in the diabetes community, men were posting videos about their moisturizing routines. But, and this is key, they always provided an instrumental justification.
They had an excuse.
Yeah, good reason. Exactly. They always have an instrumental reason. The excuse is the technology. They explain that the glue from the insulin sensors and pumps dries out the skin, so they have to moisturize to keep the equipment working.
Ah, I see.
It's not vanity, it's maintenance. It's like waxing a car or oiling a machine. They reframe a soft, caring act into a technical necessity. This allows them to engage in self-care without losing masculine points.
They do the same thing with cooking, right? It's a similar move.
Yes. Cooking and dieting are often seen as the woman's domain or associated with weight loss, which, again, is often coded feminine in our culture. But on TikTok, these men are cooking light recipes, but they don't call it dieting.
What do they call it?
They call it muscle building. They talk about macros and protein. They turn the kitchen into a lab for gains. It's the same behavior cooking healthy food, but the meaning is completely flipped to align with masculinity.
It's linguistic gymnastics to avoid being seen as soft. And then there's the emotional side. We know stoicism is a huge part of traditional masculinity. How does that hold up on TikTok? Because TikTok rewards vulnerability, usually. We see people crying on camera all the time.
It does reward vulnerability, but for these men, the stoicism largely holds. Most of the videos show men injecting insulin with total flat effect. No flinching, no pain. They mock needle fear.
Wow.
They are showing the world, this doesn't hurt me, I am tough. They are performing in vulnerability while engaging in a medical act.
But there was an exception. The distorted face filter. This felt like a crack in the armor.
This is where the hybrid masculinity comes in. There was a specific video Quaglia analyzed where a man uses a filter that distorts his face to look melted and weird. The caption is about hypoglycemia. He's saying, we have a problem.
So he's using humor to mask fear.
Exactly. Hypoglycemia is terrifying. You can pass out, you can go into a coma, you can die. It is a moment of total loss of control.
Yeah.
A hegemonic man can't admit he's terrified. He can't get on camera and weep about how scared he is. But he can make a joke about it. The filter allows him to show the vulnerability. I am losing control, but the humor provides a safety net. It says, I'm scared, but I'm still cool enough to laugh about it.
It's a way to signal distress without crying. It's socially acceptable vulnerability.
Precisely. And we also see softer masculinities emerging. Quaglia noted men dancing, lip-syncing to pop songs, even using the "It's Britney bitch" soundbite.
Which is not exactly John Wayne.
No, it's not. And that's the hybrid part. These men can perform these softer, more playful pop culture behaviors, often because they have established their toughness elsewhere, like with the muscles or the stoic injections.
Ah, so they've earned it.
It's a mix. They are expanding the definition of what a man can do, but they're usually doing it from a position of strength. They earn the right to dance by proving they can bleed without flinching.
So if we pull back and look at the whole picture, Quaglia is mapping a system here. Let's explicitly map this out for the listener because this is the core value of the book. It's not just about diabetes. It's about how social systems work. Who are the actors in this system?
Okay, the actors are the men themselves, obviously, but also the clinicians who enforce the rules, the peers, the male gaze, other men watching to see if you crack,
Right.
employers who might judge a sick worker. And now, the digital audience on TikTok, the algorithm itself, which decides what is viral and what is ignore.
And the incentives, what are they chasing?
Status.
Yeah.
Legitimacy. They want to be seen as real men despite the physical failure of their pancreas. They want autonomy to avoid the sick role of dependency.
And that moral component again.
And crucially, under healthism, they want moral worth. They want to prove they are good people because they are disciplined.
And the narratives driving this are powerful.
Yeah.
Real men endure pain. Control's the ultimate virtue. Data proves rationality.
And this creates a feedback loop. Let's trace it carefully. Step 1, the illness constraint. Diabetes hits. It threatens the man's status because it makes him dependent and vulnerable.
Okay.
Step 2, threatened identity. He feels the identity dilemma. Am I still a man if I need this medicine?
Right.
Step 3, compensatory performance. He engages in a manhood act. He becomes the tracker, the athlete, or the rebel. He tracks every number, or he runs a marathon, or he eats the pizza to prove he doesn't care.
And step 4, what happens after the performance?
Social recognition. Society or the TikTok algorithm validates him. Wow, look how disciplined he is. Look how strong he is. Look how chill he is.
Okay, and that leads to step 5.
Reinforcement. The masculine norm is reinforced. He learns that to be accepted, he must continue this performance, even if, and this is the key, even if it harms his actual well-being.
That is the tragedy of the system. The feedback loop rewards the performance of health, not necessarily the reality of well-being. The athlete might be running on a stress fracture.
Right.
The tracker might be riddled with anxiety about numbers. The free spirit might be damaging his kidneys with high blood sugar. But socially, they are winning.
And that is why the system persists. Quaglia talks about the hegemonic masculine block. It's flexible. It's like a blob that absorbs everything. It absorbs skincare. It absorbed cooking. It absorbed the illness itself. It says, okay, you can do skincare as long as you frame it as maintenance for your tech.
Right.
The patriarchy survives because it adapts. It gives men a way to do feminine things without losing their membership card.
This brings us to the present day.
Yeah.
Because even if you don't have type 1 diabetes, this system is shaping you. We are all living in a quantified self-culture.
Absolutely. Connect the tracker archetype to everyone wearing an Apple Watch or a Whoop band. We are all trackers now.
We really are.
We are all obsessively monitoring our sleep scores, our steps, our heart rate variability. Why? To prove we are disciplined, to prove we have moral worth. If you have a bad sleep score, you feel guilty. That is the system of healthism at work. We are internalizing the medical gaze.
And the performance masculinity of the athlete archetype mirrors the entire fitness influencer industry.
It does. Health has become visual. It's not about how your organs are functioning. It's about whether you look fit. It's the aesthetic of health. Muscles are the uniform of the disciplined man. You see this on Instagram every day. If you have abs, people assume you are healthy, even if you are dehydrated and starving. If you are soft, people assume you are unhealthy, even if your blood markers are perfect.
And in the workplace, I think about the fear of the sick role.
That is huge. Quaglia mentions the difference between a construction worker and a professor. The construction worker cannot show weakness. If he has a hypoglycemic episode on a scaffold, he's a liability. He might lose his job.
Sure.
So he has to hide it. He has to enact that stoicism for economic survival. The professor might have more freedom to be open, but the pressure to be reliable, to be a producer, is universal for men. In the modern workplace, consistency is the ultimate currency. Illness is inconsistency, so men hide it.
And algorithmically, we are seeing visibility bias. TikTok rewards the high-contrast narratives. The supermuscular diabetic gets the views. The guy struggling with depression and fluctuating blood sugar, the mundane, messy reality, doesn't go viral.
Which warps our perception of what the illness is. It makes the superhero narrative the standard, which puts even more pressure on the average guy who's just trying to get through the day. He looks at his phone and sees a diabetic bodybuilder, and he feels like a failure because he just feels tired.
This connects so deeply to the core themes of our channel, crisis and perception. We talk about how systems shape what we see. This system converts a private biological experience, my pancreas doesn't work, into a public status contest.
That is the crucial insight. You aren't just managing blood sugar, you are managing your ranking in the gender hierarchy. And institutions medicine media moralize these outcomes. If you have complications, the narrative says it's a failure of will.
Right.
It's a masculine failure. You weren't tough enough to beat it.
Which obscures all the structural stuff. The cost of insulin, the genetic severity of your specific case, your class background.
Exactly. The personal responsibility narrative is a mask. It allows society to ignore inequality. It frames survival as a matter of individual grit. If you die, it's because you didn't have enough grit. That is a cruel system. It erases the luck involved in biology and the support needed from society.
It really is. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what is the takeaway? What does Quaglia's book help us see differently?
I think it helps us see that masculinity is not a static rock. It's an adaptation strategy. It's a hybrid block that shifts. It can absorb skincare, cooking, and illness, provided they can be spun as forms of control. Men are working hard to maintain this identity.
And it exposes the fragility of that control.
That is the final reflection. Chronic illness exposes the lie at the center of modern life. The idea that we can have total control. We can't. Bodies fail. Biology is messy. The tracker tries to solve it with data, the athlete with muscle, the rebel with denial. But ultimately, the uncertainty is always there.
There's one anecdote from the book that I think perfectly encapsulates the power of these gender codes.
Yeah.
The story of the pink bag. This one really stayed with me.
Yes. This is heartbreaking and illuminating. Quaglia interviewed a man who admitted that for years he neglected his health management, didn't carry his insulin or testing kit with him, simply because the carrying case provided by the hospital was pink.
Just because it was pink. He would rather risk a coma than carry a pink bag.
Because it was pink. He felt that carrying a pink bag would mark him as feminine, as weak. It was emasculating. So, rather than risk that social stigma, he risked his life. He risked diabetic coma, he risked long-term organ damage, just to avoid holding a color-coded as female.
That is the system in a nutshell. It shows how arbitrary and yet how deadly these symbols can be.
It is. It proves that self-care is never neutral. It is politically shaped and culturally coded. When a man injects insulin, he is not just treating a disease, he is negotiating his place in the social order. And sometimes the social order feels more important than life itself.
That is a heavy but necessary place to leave it. We need to really think about the costs of these performances. This deep dive was based on Wounded Masculinities, Men, Health, and Chronic Illness by Valerio Quaglia. It is a fascinating read, and I highly encourage you to check it out or borrow it from a library if you want to understand these dynamics in more detail. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of system-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.